Marcus was only 12 years old, but his eyes carried the depth of someone who had already seen much of life. He lived in a small wooden house surrounded by wide fields of green. His father, a hard-working farmer, spent his days bent over the land, planting seeds, caring for animals, and praying for good weather. Marcus admired his father more than anyone, even though the world often looked down on people who worked the soil. The farm wasn't rich or fancy. The roof sometimes leaked when it rained too hard, and the walls showed the marks of years gone by. But to Marcus, it was home, a place where every morning started with the smell of fresh earth and the sound of roosters greeting the sunrise. He would wake early, sometimes before the sun, to help his father feed the chickens and carry water to the cows. His small hands would get dirty, and his clothes often carried the scent of hay. He didn't mind. In fact, he loved it. To him, the farm was alive, and every little task he did felt like a part of something bigger. His mother often reminded him, "Son, remember, hard work is nothing to be ashamed of. It builds your heart strong." She would smile at him as she prepared breakfast: cornbread, eggs, and fresh milk. Marcus held on to those words. He believed them with all his heart. But life changed when his parents decided to send him to a private school in town. They wanted him to have better opportunities, a chance to learn more, to grow beyond the limits of their small farm. His grandfather, a respected man who had once served in the military, also encouraged this decision. "Education is a tool, Marcus," he told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars. "It can open doors that strength alone cannot." Marcus was excited but also nervous. The night before his first day at the new school, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining what it would be like. Would the other kids like him? Would he fit in? He wondered if they would understand what life on a farm was like. Most of the children in that school, he knew, came from families who owned businesses or worked in offices. Their shoes would be shiny, their backpacks brand new, and their homes full of things he had only seen in magazines. The morning of his first day, Marcus polished his shoes as best as he could. His mother had ironed his uniform the night before, and though it wasn't expensive, it looked neat and clean. He packed his lunch carefully: a simple sandwich wrapped in paper, an apple, and a small carton of milk. As he walked to the school bus, his heart pounded. The road felt longer than usual, and every step seemed to echo in his ears. When he entered the classroom, the air smelled of new books and fresh paint. The walls were decorated with colorful posters, and the desks shone as if they had just been polished. The other children looked at him curiously. Some whispered to one another. Marcus sat quietly at the back, his hands folded on the desk. He tried to look confident, but inside, he felt like a stranger in a place where he did not belong. The teacher, a tall man with glasses, called the class to order. His voice was firm, and the students quickly fell silent. Marcus listened carefully, taking in every word. He wanted to do well, to prove to his parents and grandfather that he belonged here. He paid close attention to the lessons, writing neatly in his notebook, hoping the teacher would notice his effort. During break, some children approached him. "Where are you from?" one of them asked. Marcus smiled politely. "I live on a farm outside town." The boy raised his eyebrows. "A farm? Do you have cows and chickens?" Marcus nodded proudly. "Yes, lots of them." A few of the children giggled. "That's funny," one girl whispered to another. Marcus didn't fully understand why they laughed, but he pretended not to notice. At lunch, he unwrapped his sandwich. Around him, other children pulled out fancy lunchboxes with colorful packaging, snacks he had only seen in stores. His food looked plain compared to theirs, but it was made with love from home. As he took a bite, he thought of his mother's gentle hands preparing it, and he smiled. The first few days passed like this quietly, with Marcus keeping to himself. He was polite, attentive, and careful not to draw attention. But the whispers never fully stopped. Some children were kind, asking him questions about farm life, but others looked at him differently, as if he were less important because his family didn't own shiny cars or big houses. Marcus often thought of his grandfather in those moments. He remembered the stories the old man used to tell of courage, of standing tall even when others tried to make you feel small. His grandfather had faced storms far greater than a child's laughter, yet he never bent. Marcus wanted to be like him, steady, calm, unshaken. One evening, after another long day of school, Marcus sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange with the setting sun. His father returned from the fields, his hands rough and his clothes stained from work. Sitting beside his son, he asked, "How was school today?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "It was fine," he said softly, though his heart carried a heavier truth. His father studied him for a moment, then patted his shoulder. "Remember, son," he said, "people may not always see the worth in what we do, but that doesn't change its value. The earth teaches us patience. One day, the seeds you plant will grow, even if others can't see them now." Marcus nodded, though a part of him still felt uncertain. He wanted so much to be accepted, to be seen not for where he came from, but for who he was. He didn't yet know that soon, events would unfold that would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone at that school. For now, though, Marcus remained the quiet boy at the back of the classroom, the farmer's son who carried dreams bigger than the fields he came from. And while others might not have noticed it yet, inside him burned a spirit that could not be dimmed. Marcus had begun to settle into the rhythm of his new school. Every morning, he put on his uniform, tied his shoes neatly, and carried his books with care. He sat quietly in the classroom, always paying attention, always writing notes carefully. On the outside, he seemed calm, but inside, he carried a nervous energy, as if he was walking on a tightrope. The whispers had not stopped. When he walked through the hallway, he sometimes heard giggles behind him. When he answered a question in class, some children exchanged glances as if surprised that he even knew the answer. Marcus kept his head down, reminding himself of his grandfather's words about strength and dignity. But being different was not easy. One morning, as the students settled into their seats, the teacher began a history lesson. He wrote dates and events on the blackboard, his chalk making quick, sharp sounds. Marcus listened carefully, fascinated by the stories of battles, leaders, and changes that had shaped the country. History reminded him of his grandfather, who often spoke of the past with great pride. Then, something happened that Marcus would never forget. The teacher paused, turned toward the class, and asked a question about the economy during that period. Marcus, who had been reading ahead in the textbook the night before, raised his hand confidently. The teacher called on him. Marcus stood and answered in a clear voice. He explained how farming had played a role in supporting families and communities during difficult times. His answer was correct, but before he could even sit back down, the teacher chuckled. "Well," the teacher said loudly so the whole class could hear, "I suppose you would know something about farming, wouldn't you?" He smiled in a way that felt sharp, not kind. "After all, that's all your family does, isn't it? Farming." The class fell silent for a moment. Then a few children laughed quietly. Marcus felt his face grow hot. He sat down quickly, lowering his eyes, his hands trembling slightly under the desk. He wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor where no one could see him. The lesson continued, but Marcus couldn't focus. His mind repeated the words again and again, like an echo he couldn't escape. Farming. That's all your family does. The words weren't just about him, they felt like a dismissal of his father's sweat, his mother's care, and the life he cherished at home. At lunch that day, Marcus sat alone under a tree. He opened his lunch slowly, staring at the sandwich his mother had packed with such love. Around him, children chattered happily, sharing snacks, laughing about jokes he didn't understand. He took a bite, but it tasted different, heavier, almost bitter, not because of the food, but because of the feelings he carried. As he sat there, he thought of his father's hands, rough and cracked from years of work. He thought of his mother's gentle smile as she told him not to be ashamed. And he thought of his grandfather's strong voice, reminding him that courage was not about fighting back but about standing tall. Yet in that moment, Marcus felt small, smaller than ever before. The following days were harder. The teacher continued with his lessons, but Marcus felt the weight of eyes on him whenever farming was mentioned. Some classmates whispered and laughed quietly, as though the subject itself had become a joke tied to his name. Each time, Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat and kept silent. He didn't want to cause trouble. He didn't want to disappoint his parents. At home, his family noticed the change in him. He spoke less, smiled less. His father asked once, "Is something bothering you, son?" Marcus shook his head quickly. "I'm fine, Dad," he said, though he wasn't. His mother studied his face but didn't press him. She knew her son's gentle nature. He would speak when he was ready. One evening, Marcus sat on the porch with his grandfather. The old man rocked slowly in his chair, his metals shining faintly in the fading sunlight. "You've been quiet lately," his grandfather said. Marcus looked down at his hands. "It's just school," Marcus whispered. "What about school?" the old man asked, his voice calm, steady. Marcus hesitated, then spoke softly. "They don't see me for who I am. They laugh, they say things about where I come from. Even the teacher," his voice trailed off. His grandfather's rocking chair creaked to a stop. The old man's eyes, though lined with age, were sharp and full of fire. "And how does that make you feel?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Small," he admitted. His grandfather leaned forward, placing a strong hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Listen to me, son. No one decides your worth except you. People may laugh, people may try to make you feel less. But remember this, the roots of a tree may be hidden underground, but they are what keep it standing tall. Your roots are in hard work, honesty, and love. Never be ashamed of that." Marcus nodded, though the heaviness in his heart remained. His grandfather's words were powerful, but the sting of humiliation was still fresh. He wondered how he could face the next day, knowing the whispers and laughter might continue. The next morning, as he walked to the bus stop, Marcus felt the weight of the school bag heavier than usual. His feet dragged slightly, but he kept moving. He couldn't stop going to school, not when his parents worked so hard to give him this opportunity. He had to endure, even if it hurt. In class, the teacher carried on as though nothing had happened. To him, the remark had been a joke, something harmless. But to Marcus, it had been a wound. And like all wounds, it ached quietly, reminding him of its presence with every passing day. That afternoon, during group work, Marcus tried to contribute ideas. But one of the students smirked and said, "Why don't you just tell us how farmers would solve it?" The others laughed again. Marcus forced a weak smile and stayed quiet. He didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of them. When he got home that day, he went straight to his room. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His lunchbox still sat in his bag, untouched. His mother knocked gently before entering. She placed her hand on his forehead, brushing his hair back. "You're carrying something heavy," she said softly. "Don't carry it alone." Marcus turned his face to the side, tears threatening to fall. "Why can't they just see me as normal?" he whispered. His mother kissed his forehead. "Because sometimes, people don't understand what they haven't lived. But that doesn't make you less. It makes you strong." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep again. The teacher's words replayed in his mind like a shadow he couldn't escape. He wished he could hide, wished he could be invisible. But little did he know, the coming days would bring something unexpected, something that would change how everyone at school looked at him, and how he looked at himself. For now, he was still the boy carrying silent pain, unsure of how to lift his head again. But the story was not over. His struggle had only just begun, and so had the lessons waiting for him. The night after another difficult day at school, Marcus sat on the porch steps, staring at the quiet fields stretching out before him. The stars had begun to scatter across the sky, twinkling like tiny lanterns. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and the gentle hum of crickets filled the silence. But Marcus didn't feel the peace of the night. His heart was heavy, his mind restless. He replayed the moment in class again and again, the teacher's mocking words, the quiet laughter that followed, the way his classmates looked at him as though he was someone to be pitied. Every time he thought about it, he felt smaller, like the world was pressing down on him. His grandfather, sitting in his rocking chair nearby, noticed the faraway look in Marcus's eyes. The old man had been silent for a while, letting his grandson gather his thoughts. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady and warm. "You're carrying something you shouldn't carry alone," he said. Marcus looked up slowly. "Grandpa, it's just school." The old man's eyes, sharp even with age, narrowed slightly. "No, it's more than that. School is supposed to lift you, not weigh you down." Marcus hesitated, then poured out the truth. He told his grandfather about the teacher's words, about the laughter, about how small he felt every time someone reminded him that he was just a farmer's son. His voice trembled as he spoke, but once he started, the words flowed freely. He had been holding them in too long. His grandfather listened without interrupting, his weathered hands folded neatly on his lap. When Marcus finished, silence stretched between them. Then the old man leaned forward, his eyes burning with quiet strength. "Marcus," he said firmly, "never forget this. People can laugh at you, people can try to put you in a box, but that does not define you. Do you understand? You carry the blood of men and women who worked hard, who stood tall, who never gave up no matter what life threw at them. You are not small. You are strong. And it's time others saw that too." Marcus looked down, his throat tight. "But how, Grandpa? They don't see me that way. To them, I'll always just be different." A slow smile spread across his grandfather's face, the kind of smile that carried both wisdom and mischief. "Then maybe it's time we remind them who you are. Sometimes people need to see before they can understand. And I think it's time they see." Marcus tilted his head, confused. "See what?" But his grandfather didn't answer directly. He simply leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting toward the night sky. "You'll find out tomorrow," he said softly. That night, Marcus lay in bed, wide awake. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. What did he mean? What would happen tomorrow? A mix of curiosity and nervousness swirled in his chest. He wanted to ask again, but something about his grandfather's calm tone made him trust that whatever was coming, it was meant to help him. Morning arrived bright and clear. Marcus dressed as usual, ate his breakfast quietly, and got ready for school. His parents noticed the hint of worry in his eyes, but his grandfather, unusually cheerful, simply gave him a reassuring nod. "Go on, son," he said. "Walk tall today." Marcus climbed onto the school bus, his mind racing. He sat by the window, staring out at the fields passing by, trying to guess what his grandfather had meant. But as the bus pulled into the schoolyard, nothing seemed different. Students bustled about, chatting and laughing, teachers hurried through the halls, and the day began like any other. The first few classes passed quietly. Marcus tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting. Was his grandfather planning to visit the school? Maybe he would talk to the teacher. Or maybe nothing would happen at all, and it had just been words of comfort to give Marcus hope. But then, just as the students were gathering in the courtyard for recess, a deep, rumbling sound filled the air. At first, no one knew what it was. The sound grew louder, stronger, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Students stopped mid-sentence, teachers looked up in confusion, and within seconds, everyone's eyes were turned toward the sky. A helicopter appeared in the distance, its blades slicing through the morning air. The sun glinted off its metal body as it drew closer, the sound now thunderous. Students gasped and pointed, some shielding their eyes from the glare. Teachers hurried to calm the crowd, but even they were frozen in surprise. The helicopter descended slowly, gracefully, and then unbelievably it landed right in the open field beside the schoolyard. Dust and grass swirled in the air as the blades continued to spin, and for a moment, it felt like a scene from a movie. Marcus's heart leapt into his throat. He knew that helicopter. He had seen it once before, years ago, when his grandfather had taken him to a military reunion. His eyes widened as the door opened. And there, stepping out with firm, steady steps, was his grandfather. The old man wore his uniform, neatly pressed, his medals shining proudly against his chest. His presence was commanding, yet calm. The students stared in awe, whispers racing through the crowd. Teachers exchanged stunned glances, unsure of what to do. Marcus stood frozen, a mix of shock, pride, and disbelief flooding his heart. His grandfather walked toward him with slow, deliberate steps. The field was silent except for the fading hum of the helicopter. When he reached his grandson, the old man placed a firm hand on his shoulder and looked around at the gathering crowd. His voice carried strong and clear, though he wasn't shouting. "This boy," he said, "is my grandson. He comes from a family of farmers, yes. But never forget this, farming feeds nations, and dignity comes not from wealth, but from character. His father works with his hands, his mother with her heart, and I, too, have served this land with pride. So when you look at him, do not see just a farmer's son. See the strength of his roots, and the greatness of what he can become." The courtyard was silent. Every word hung heavy in the air, sinking into the hearts of those listening. Marcus's eyes burned with tears, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from pride in his family, pride in himself. His grandfather had shown him what he couldn't say with words, that his background wasn't something to hide, but something to hold up proudly. For the first time since he had started at the school, Marcus didn't feel small. He stood straighter, his chest lifted, his eyes clear. Around him, classmates whispered not with laughter, but with awe. Some looked at him differently now, not as a boy to be mocked, but as someone whose story carried weight. In that moment, Marcus realized that his grandfather hadn't just come to protect him. He had come to remind him of who he was, to give him the courage to stand tall even when others tried to push him down. The helicopter's blades still turned slowly in the background, but the real turning point had already happened. The boy who once sat quietly in the back of the classroom now carried himself with quiet strength, the kind of strength that could not be taken away by words or laughter. The next day, life at school would not be the same for Marcus, for his classmates, or even for the teacher who had once belittled him. The seeds of change had been planted, and they were about to grow. The helicopter had left the schoolyard, but the sound of its blades still seemed to echo in the hearts of the students and teachers. That day, no one could stop talking about what had happened. A helicopter landing on the school field was something they had never imagined, and the sight of Marcus's grandfather stepping out in full uniform was unforgettable. Marcus walked through the hallways differently after that. For the first time since he had arrived, students didn't look at him with smirks or whispers. Instead, they looked at him with wide eyes, some even with admiration. A boy who had laughed at him before now asked, "Was that really your grandfather? He looked so brave." Another student leaned in and said, "I didn't know you came from such a strong family." Marcus didn't boast, didn't brag, didn't even raise his voice. He simply nodded politely, just as his grandfather had taught him. "Yes," he said softly, "that's my grandfather." Inside, though, his heart swelled with pride. The weight he had been carrying for weeks, the shame, the humiliation, the loneliness had lifted. The change in his classmates' attitudes was clear. At lunch, instead of sitting alone under the tree, Marcus found other children inviting him to sit with them. They asked him questions about the farm, but this time the tone was different. It wasn't mocking. It was curious, respectful, even impressed. "What's it like to wake up on a farm every morning?" one boy asked. "Do you really grow your own vegetables?" another added. Marcus smiled. "Yes. And sometimes I help my dad with the cows too." For the first time, the same stories that once made him feel small now made others look at him with wonder. He realized that nothing about him had changed, only the way people saw him. His grandfather's bold action had forced them to look beyond their narrow ideas and see the truth, that there was honor in his roots. But the biggest change came from the teacher. The man who had once chuckled at Marcus's answer now carried himself differently around him. The very next lesson, when Marcus raised his hand to answer, the teacher paused before calling on him. His voice was softer, more respectful. Marcus gave his answer, and instead of dismissing him with a joke, the teacher nodded. "That's a thoughtful response," he said. It was only a small sentence, but to Marcus, it felt enormous. It was acknowledgement. It was respect. Over the next week, the teacher seemed quieter whenever farming came up in discussions. The careless smile that once followed Marcus's words was gone. Marcus noticed the difference, but he didn't let pride take over. Instead, he remembered what his grandfather had said: "Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you carry, and in time, others recognize it." At home, Marcus's parents saw the change in him too. His mother noticed the sparkle had returned to his eyes. His father, tired from long hours in the field, still managed to smile when Marcus excitedly told him how his classmates were finally listening instead of laughing. His grandfather simply nodded knowingly, as though he had expected nothing less. "You see, boy," his grandfather said one evening as they watched the sunset together, "sometimes you don't need to argue with people. You just need to show them. Not by words, but by standing tall in who you are. Once they see your truth, their laughter loses its power." Marcus carried those words to school every day. Slowly, he began to feel a part of the place. When the class was divided into groups, no one left him out anymore. During sports, boys who once ignored him now passed him the ball. And when presentations were assigned, his classmates wanted him on their team, knowing he worked hard and thought carefully. One afternoon, something remarkable happened. The same history teacher who had once made fun of him asked him to share with the class about farm life. Marcus froze for a moment, unsure if this was another joke. But the teacher's face was serious, almost apologetic. "Since we're learning about how agriculture supports communities," the teacher said, "I think Marcus can give us a perspective that none of us here have." The class turned to look at him, not with smirks but with genuine interest. Marcus stood slowly, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath, remembering his grandfather's voice, "Walk tall." He began to speak about the mornings on the farm, about planting seeds, about waiting patiently for rain. He explained how every crop was a gamble, how his father worked even when the sun burned high, how his mother's care kept the family strong. The room was silent, every ear tuned to his words. For the first time, Marcus felt not like an outsider but like someone who carried knowledge others didn't have. When he finished, the class clapped politely, and the teacher nodded. "Thank you, Marcus. That was eye-opening." Marcus sat down, his cheeks warm, but this time not from shame. It was from pride. That evening, as he walked home from the bus, the fields stretched wide around him, glowing gold in the setting sun. He breathed in the scent of earth and grass and felt a deep connection to the land. He thought about how, just a few days ago, he had wished he could hide his roots. Now, he wouldn't trade them for anything. The helicopter visit had not just stunned the school, it had opened a door. It had reminded Marcus of who he was and reminded everyone else of the respect he deserved. But even more, it had planted courage in his heart. He no longer needed the roar of helicopter blades to feel strong. He carried that strength within himself now. One night, as he helped his father close the barn doors, Marcus spoke softly. "Dad." "Yes, son. I used to think I was less than the others because of where I come from. But now I think maybe I'm lucky. I have something they don't. I have roots." His father looked at him, surprised, then smiled a slow, proud smile. "You've grown, Marcus. And you're right. Roots keep you standing when the wind blows hardest." Marcus went to bed that night with a heart that felt lighter than it had in weeks. The struggles at school weren't gone entirely. He knew there would always be challenges, always people who might judge without understanding. But he also knew now that he could face them. He was no longer just the boy sitting quietly in the back of the classroom, wishing to be invisible. He was Marcus, the farmer's son, the grandson of a man who had shown the world that dignity cannot be taken away. And he was ready to walk into tomorrow with his head held high. The weeks after the helicopter landing passed quickly, but the memory of that day stayed fresh in everyone's mind. Students still talked about it during lunch, and sometimes even teachers mentioned it with amazement. It was more than just a surprising event. It had become a story that reshaped how people saw Marcus, his family, and even themselves. For Marcus, life felt different now. The heavy weight that once sat on his shoulders was gone. He no longer walked through the hallways with lowered eyes. Instead, he walked with quiet confidence, his steps steady, his gaze calm. People noticed. The same students who once whispered about him now greeted him with smiles. They no longer saw him as just a farmer's son, but as someone who carried a story worth respecting. But what touched Marcus the most was not the admiration of others. It was the way his classmates began to ask real questions, not just about the helicopter, but about his life, his family, and the farm. They wanted to understand, not laugh. Marcus told them about the early mornings, the sound of roosters at dawn, the smell of fresh hay. He explained how his father's work never ended, how his mother's love held the family together, and how the land itself taught lessons of patience and hope. One day, during recess, a boy who had once made fun of him came up quietly. "Marcus," he said, hesitating, "I'm sorry for laughing before. I didn't understand. But now I do." Marcus looked at him for a moment, then smiled gently. "It's okay," he said. "Sometimes people don't know until they see differently." The boy nodded, relief spreading across his face. From then on, the two slowly became friends. The teacher, too, seemed changed. He no longer made careless remarks. Instead, he often paused to remind the class that respect mattered more than appearances. Sometimes, he even asked Marcus to share his thoughts during lessons, giving him the space to speak with confidence. Marcus noticed this, and while he didn't forget the hurtful words from before, he chose to let go of bitterness. Holding on to anger would only weigh him down. Forgiveness, he realized, was another kind of strength. At home, his parents saw how their son was growing, not just in knowledge but in character. His mother often hugged him a little longer, whispering, "We're proud of you." His father, though a man of few words, would smile when he saw Marcus studying or helping on the farm, his pride shining through his tired eyes. His grandfather, however, was the one who continued to remind him of the deeper lesson. One evening, as they sat together watching the fields sway gently in the evening breeze, the old man spoke softly. "Do you see, Marcus? Respect is not about titles, money, or uniforms. It's about how you carry yourself, how you honor your roots, and how you treat others." That day at the school, I only reminded them of what was always true: you are worthy. But remember, it's not the helicopter that gave you strength. It was already inside you. The helicopter only showed you what you had forgotten. Marcus nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. He realized his grandfather was right. The dramatic moment had opened eyes, yes, but the real change was inside him. He had learned to see himself differently, to value his family and his life in a way he never had before. As the months passed, Marcus began to shine not only in confidence but also in his studies. He discovered that he loved learning, especially history, because it connected him to stories of courage and perseverance. His classmates admired how thoughtful he was, and soon, he became someone they looked up to. He was no longer just the new kid. He was Marcus, respected, valued, and strong. But Marcus never let pride carry him away. He remembered his grandfather's warning that true strength lies in humility. He continued to help his father in the fields, to carry buckets of water, to feed the chickens, to wake up early before the sun. He continued to eat his mother's simple sandwiches at school with pride, no matter how plain they looked compared to the colorful snacks around him. Because now, he knew the truth, love and hard work tasted better than anything money could buy. The story of the helicopter became part of the school's history. New students who joined later would hear whispers about it, amazed at the tale of a boy whose grandfather landed in a helicopter to remind everyone of respect. For Marcus, the story was not about the helicopter at all, it was about the lesson it carried. Years later, when Marcus grew older, he often thought back to those days. He realized that the humiliation he once felt had shaped him into someone stronger. If life had been easy, he might never have understood the value of his roots. The struggle, painful as it was, became the soil in which his courage grew. One evening, as he stood with his grandfather by the barn, Marcus asked, "Do you think I'll ever be as strong as you?" His grandfather chuckled softly. "Stronger, Marcus? You'll be stronger. Because you've already learned what took me years to understand, that respect begins with how you see yourself. And once you carry that truth, nothing in this world can take it from you." Marcus smiled, his heart full. He knew then that the greatest gift his grandfather had given him was not the helicopter moment, but the reminder of his worth. That reminder would stay with him for life. In the years to come, Marcus would carry that lesson into everything he did. Whether it was his studies, his friendships, or his work on the farm, he carried himself with dignity. People remembered him not for the helicopter, but for the way he treated others with kindness, patience, and quiet strength. The boy who had once felt small had grown into someone unshakable. And though he never sought attention, his presence carried weight. He was proof that respect does not come from wealth or status but from character. Looking back, Marcus often reflected on those difficult days at school. He realized that without them, he might never have understood the importance of standing tall in who he was. He learned that sometimes the greatest struggles lead to the most powerful lessons. And so, the story of the farmer's son and the helicopter was not just about one moment in time. It was about a journey from shame to pride, from silence to strength, from being looked down upon to being lifted up. It was about the roots of a family, deep and unshakable, that carried him through the storm. As Marcus grew into adulthood, he carried one simple truth wherever he went: dignity is not something given by others. It is something you carry inside, planted deep like the roots of a strong tree. And once you know it, no storm, no laughter, no careless word can ever uproot it.